If you like incredibly fast or mobile characters with high damage, well, the Bladedancer is your best bet in Last Epoch. This is an incredibly fun character build, and I'm happy to share it with you. First, let's cover some of the basics. There's a ton of nuances and keywords that go along with this build, but you don't actually have to memorize them all, which is just a nice benefit. You just need to know that they're all going to have synergy within the build. They're going to work to improve your character. First one of these is going to be Shadow Daggers, and this is actually something that's not even available on our loadout. In fact, if we look at my skills here, this is going to be Umbral Blades, Shift, Shadow Cascade, which was hidden for a second, Smoke Bomb, and Decoy. So what is the Shadow Dagger I'm talking about? Well, if we go into some of the tooltips here, you'll see that we'll gain an ability called Sword Thrower, and then here we'll get Lethal Darkness. Umbral Blade hits inflict a stack of Shadow Dagger on hit while using a dagger. Shadow Daggers, reaching 4 stacks, is going to plunge into the target, dealing physical damage. This damage always critically strikes, so this is going to be a big part of our build. It's going to have scaling tags of physical, melee, throwing attack, and dexterity. All we're really going to care about in this build is surviving and then proccing the Shadow Dagger. And everything we've taken does one of those things, helps us survive or helps us proc more Shadow Daggers. I'll leave a link in the description for Last Epoch tools where you can see all the skill points for the talent tree as well as the passive points. We'll talk about some of the more important ones in this video. So here we're going to go ahead and just throw our Umbral Blades, and we're going to throw that at a target. And it's basically going to take them out. The Umbral Blades will also return as you cast it a number of times, or they'll just wear off on a duration. So here I'll throw one, it's going to spin, I can throw another, and then I can return them to myself. This can be altered through passive points, and we'll actually spec further to have additional blades when we get more levels. But right now, just know that your large portion of your damage is going to be from the spinning effect. And the longer we let this linger on the enemy, the better. So let's go ahead and find a more stationary enemy or a pack like that. You'll see we just start to get crits as it goes into enemies. So all we're really doing is casting this and basically running or kiting and continuing to move. And this is going to increase our clear speed quite dramatically. We've also got Decoy, and you'll see this is going to emit a pulse. And this is going to actually add some utility. It's going to taunt the enemies and give us some buffs as well as debuffs for the enemies. But I want to show some more of the gameplay in kind of live form. So take a look. I'm really just kind of running or moving as fast as possible, throwing these Umbral Blades, and then shifting through, which is casting the Shadow Cascades. That's what those daggers going around the screen getting thrown out as projectiles are. And we're buffing that skill, but we're not actually going to actively use it. We're just going to allow that shift to use it for us. And aside from that, we also have Smoke Bomb, a defensive and offensive cooldown. We'll mainly use this for more difficult mobs or bosses, and we won't typically take advantage of that while we're moving, because at that point we're kind of remaining within the smoke cloud or trying to keep the enemy within it. You'll see here there's just absolutely no trouble clearing anything out. We're just moving as fast as possible, essentially using shift almost every time it's off cooldown, and this will just kill packs on its own. So we can throw daggers, we can leave them there, we can let them linger, or we can return them to us. And when we get an enemy like this, we can always cast the taunt for the decoy there, and then just start nuking them with the daggers. Or alternatively, depending on the type of enemy or encounter you have, just throw the daggers and let them linger there while you avoid what's coming your way. And just by leaving those spinning, they're going to proc those Shadow Daggers and do enormous amounts of damage. What else are we doing with this? Well, let's take a look at the passive trees. As mentioned before, this and the skill trees for the specializations will be available in the description for Last Epoch tools. For rogue passives, what we're really doing here is getting some additional dodge rating, some resist. We're taking less damage while moving, and again, we can throw these Umbral Blades and just shift or move around. So this is going to be a large portion of how we stay alive. The second we stop moving, we become a lot more susceptible to dying. Top of this, we get agility, increased damage per 1% increased movement speed. So we're just going to essentially stack movement speed as high as possible and get a large chunk of additional damage from that. And we're going to get things like Pursuit, where we're going to get throwing attack damage. We also get additional movement speed. So again, just kind of synergizing with that. And essentially the whole layout goes in this way. Additional throwing damage, dodge rating. And what I really like about this build is it has so much damage and so frequently crits with those Shadow Daggers that we can actually just focus on using our passive points essentially to be defensive for the most part, and really adds to the survivability of the build. And also with our equipment gearing choices, we can do the same thing. We can make sure that we're gearing and stacking up resistances, adding health, using ward in places if we can fit it in, just allowing for this character to survive, because you really don't have to worry too much about adding any damage to the build. It kind of just comes naturally. We're going to get stacks of Dust Shroud, and again, you don't need to memorize all these terms to play the build. Just know that you're getting additional survivability tools. Glancing Blow, another thing that's going to help reduce damage that you take. as well as some passive life. And the whole tree is going to be this way with all the points. We get some increased damage here. You can go into weapons of choice. Ideally, you have an axe and a dagger. This is going to give you some additional leech, which is really strong for this particular build. If you don't, I honestly don't think any of these else are worth investing. You can certainly use this by any means if you would like, but in general, I kind of save this for cases where I am using an axe and dagger. We put 1 point into critical eye, and that's just to unlock all in. We're going to just further boost the critical strike multiplier that we have for those Shadow Daggers. That's essentially the gist of the build. We have a ton of armor shred, again allowing us just to give more flexible gearing options. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the gear that I've used on this character. I've got slow on hit. This is just a nice additional utility item to have. We also have a chance for bleed. Damage over time effects aren't really great for this particular build. They don't hurt it in any way, but this main source of your damage is going to come from those critical strikes. Again, I just really want to reiterate the fact that you can just focus on certain things to buff dexterity, throwing attack speed, throwing attack damage. All these are going to be very strong stats. So here we have some dexterity with some resistance, some additional armor, poison resistance on the innate property, some throwing attack speed from the innate property, some various resistances, some physical damage. This is really going to be the theme as you kind of glance over all the gear that I've been able to acquire while leveling. Some innate physical damage, dexterity, some void resist, and again, it'll basically be the same all the way through, and I'll just kind of hover over so you can see. I do want to mention the Rogue Relic. Your first chance to pick one of these up, make sure you grab it. Getting the damage leech as health on hit and increased damage leached as health are going to be really important for this character build. You don't need it prior to the point that these begin dropping in the game, so don't worry about it until they become available. But once you do, regardless of what it has for stats, it's probably going to be better than any other relic that you had access to prior. Overall, this build is an incredible amount of fun. If you want high mobility, tons of damage, and just enough survivability to get by, I definitely recommend this build. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.